This is the first video in a method that I like to teach because I think it's a really good way to get started on digital painting. So in this video, we're looking at creating the sketch, first of all, using shape levels. First thing, in any drawing that you do, you're going to want to start out with reference photos. So I actually have shared some reference photos here, and I'll try to link them underneath the video as well. You'll want to go to each of them and download them. Then we'll go into Photoshop and put each image into our canvas by going File, Place Embedded. And the current version of Photoshop we're using only lets you add one at a time. So you take each one of them, they'll appear with the transform box around them. You can use those handles to make it whatever size you need it to be. Then hit enter when it's in the right spot and it will be set. You're just going to want to repeat that with all 4 images to get them onto your canvas. I'm leaving a space to the right, blank space where I'm going to actually do the drawing. Right now I'm okay with just kind of stacking the images on top of each other. Later on it's no big deal to move them. Just get them in there somewhere. Once all 4 images are in, we're going to use a technique that we call shape levels, where we start with the broadest shapes. And the first shape is the bounding box. That's a shape that represents the outline around the entire object. So with my brush tool on a new layer, I'm going to go in and try to sketch out the simplest shape that completely encloses this cat. Now normally you would not take your photo and trace out a line like this. But I want you to be able to see what I'm seeing, and I want you to practice finding those lines. As you get better and better at drawing, you'll be able to just see the box and draw it free-handed. So now I'm hiding all the images by clicking the little eye next to their layer. And now on my own area, I'm trying to copy that bounding box as accurately as possible. I'm looking at all the angles for each of those lines, making some adjustments where I messed up, and trying to get all the sizes and proportions right. Take your time to get that box right. Once you've got that bounding box in, everything else you're going to draw will fit inside of it. I'm going to outline the primary shapes on a new layer. Think of primary shapes as what divides the big bounding box into the individual parts of the object. Things like the entire head and the body and feet, but no details yet. I'm seeing this body as kind of a large circle, so I'm going to go ahead and draw that shape all the way through, even though we won't see the back of the circle, and the legs and toes on there. And then once we have all those lines in place, we're once again going to turn the cat drawing off and just try to duplicate those shapes as accurately as possible. It's an easier way to do it if you are just looking at the shapes rather than trying to look at a cat. What I'm doing here is a little measurement. I would normally do this with my fingers on the screen, but to let you see what I'm doing, I'll just stick a line there, compare the size of the head to the size of the body, and you can see that the head was actually bigger than the body. So as I copy those shapes over here, I'm going to try to get it the same exact proportions. You'll notice my lines are kind of messy as I'm finding that location, and that's fine. We will clean that up in a later step. It's okay to explore now and adjust and just try to get things as close as possible to what is in the actual picture. And again, you of course won't trace it out on your picture normally, but in this case we wanted to be able to see the shapes without being distracted by the actual cat. So again, take your time, get the details in there. I've still got my line here. I'll use it to compare and say, okay, the head is this big, the body is slightly smaller than the head, which means my proportions on my drawing are the same as the proportions in the photo. And as far as ears go, definitely don't try to just draw a triangle ear. You'll end up with something weird that doesn't actually fit the cat. You need to look at the shape that's really there and try to follow those angles and distances as accurately as you possibly can. Don't even think about cats right now. Think about shapes, only shapes. So these would be our primary shapes that we have on there. And I'm going to take a minute to clean it up. Any time you invest now is worth it. It will save you lots of time later. I'm actually going to add some extra things like some back feet to my cat and a tail because I want that to appear in the picture, but I'm thinking about where it would appear on the real cat in real life and just looking, trying my best to duplicate what was in the photo. Next step will be easier if you go over to your layers and you turn down the opacity a little bit using that slider. And we're going to create a new layer for our secondary shapes. Secondary is where we're going to start to block out the individual details. First we had the bounding box for the main shape, then primary shapes just to divide the head and the legs from each other. Now these details are going to be like, I see a whole muzzle going on in here, this circle, and the little nose in the middle. So I'm going to try to capture those as simple shapes. And if I look at the muzzle and the eyes together, I see kind of this triangle. And by grouping these shapes and finding the angle of those larger shapes around them, I'm going to be able to more easily copy them over onto my drawing and keep them in the right place according to each other. So I'll get those little toes in there, make sure that all the lines are on the legs and everything is clear, and then I go back to my drawing and I'm going to try to duplicate that triangular shape. The muzzle, it's taking me a little bit to adjust and make sure I get that right. Currently it's too small and too messy. So adjust. It's okay if this part is scribbly and messy, and just get everything in there as close to the real shapes as you possibly can. At that point it might help to turn the picture back on so you can see the details in the eyes. And I don't really love how this mouth is looking right now. I want to capture more of that little cute, innocent sort of look. So go back again. Again, it's super easy, super fast to make changes at this point. This is where you want to really take your time and get things right first, because 5 minutes more work here saves you an hour later on when you're trying to color this thing and paint it up. So I'm just working my way around it, making it look as good as I can, adjusting things where they need to be adjusted, erasing things where they need to be erased, just to make sure I have it all in place. So my layers tab over here is getting kind of messy. So I'm going to select several layers by holding down Shift and clicking on them. Then I will right click and I will merge these layers and it will make them all into one layer. So that also means that I can easily get rid of part of it. So if I grab my marquee tool, this rectangle selector, I select all of my sketch that I did on the picture, I can just delete that by hitting delete and my picture is clean and ready to go again. So I actually have several reference images for the mouse because I like the fuzziness of the cloth mouse, but I liked the shape of the mechanical mouse. And also it's going to be ripped in half. This kitty's going to have shredded it. And so I wanted the shape of stuffing. So always use reference images as you're drawing, even if you're not going to duplicate it. For the mouse, I'm going to do the exact same thing I did with the cat, but I need more space. So I'm going to grab the crop tool and drag that down to have a bigger canvas, then hit enter to set it, and I'm ready to have more space to draw on. So I'm being really artistic with the mouse. I'm not following the image very closely. I'm imagining if those mice in the pictures were turned in the direction I needed them to be, what would they look like? Again, I'm just doing a sketch right now, just trying to get it down. So it is okay if your lines are a bit messy as you're discovering what it should look like. I like it having a bit of a chubby belly there and how that would look. And I think the idea of a tail kind of curving around and up so that it almost meets the cat's tail, I think that creates a nice line that kind of flows through the whole picture and ties the mouse and the cat together. So I'm going to make the mouse's tail kind of follow along that line. It was a little bit too straight, a little bit too obvious I was doing that. So I think I'll put a kink in the mouse's tail like that so we can bend it up a bit. And now I'm looking at the stuffing. What does stuffing actually look like? It's not just like cloudy blobs. It's kind of chaotic. It has denser sections and darker sections. And I'm trying to just sort of capture that in there. So work through your cat and your mouse to get those general shapes in there right. Work it back and forth as much as you need to. Erase what you need to. explore your line. In the next step, we're going to make a nice clean line drawing that will clean up all those scribbly marks.